Well, it definitely is to loosen them up. I mean, that's why it's a great thing, to make barnyard animal noises on the first day. And I always tell them, I don't know if this is what Tim used to say to us too, but you feel a little self-conscious walking into this room and are a little afraid of what's going to happen next. And maybe you don't like public speaking or whatever your thing is that leads you to an acting class or a theater class at this age. And just know now that we've probably done the silliest thing possible, and everything else should feel a little bit easier.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Matthew Worwood.
And my name is Dr. Cyndi Burnett.
This is the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast.
On this podcast, we'll be talking about various creativity topics and how they relate to the field of education.
We'll be talking with scholars, educators, and resident experts about their work, challenges they face, and exploring new perspectives of creativity.
All with the goal to help fuel a more rich and informed discussion that provides teachers, administrators, and emerging scholars with the information they need to infuse creativity into teaching and learning.
So let's begin.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast. And if you are into theater and arts and creativity and education, this is a show for you. So today we welcome Dr. Jim Devivo, who is a specialist in youth-driven theater. He teaches middle and high school theater for Homedale Township Schools and is an adjunct professor with the program in educational theater at NYU. For 15 years, Jim produced the New Jersey Youth Playwrights Festival, for which he received a New Jersey Governor's Award for Arts Education. Jim has a BFA in theater, which he did alongside me way back when, 25 years ago, and a Master of Arts and PhD in Educational Theater from NYU. He lives at the Jersey Shore with his wife, Bridget, also an award-winning theater, and together they direct a troupe of 3 children and 1 pug. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Glad to see you again.
Yes. So, Jim, let's start with something I found on your website. I'm going to start with this phrase, the classroom is a theater. Explain that to us.
Yeah, well, we can be very basic about it. This is actually one of the things that I like to introduce to the middle school kids, is that just the setup of the room and the way that we tend to think of education and have been doing it for over 100 years. We have someone in the front who's giving information, telling a story, and then a built-in audience of people, taking that information in, reacting, I hope, just that simple setup. But I've also found too that one of the things that's helped me the most in transitioning to becoming a classroom teacher, which I only did about 7 years ago, is that training as an actor. I don't think I've ever performed as much or as put in as much energy into a performance as I have in front of a classroom.
Yeah, but that's really important. And we've kind of alluded to that on other episodes, is that when you're standing up and communicating information, and it is, I love the way you referenced it as information, right? It's somebody else's knowledge, and to us, it's information, and we're sharing that information with the students in the hope that they are able to make the necessary connections where they can construct their own knowledge with that. But obviously, that means it's really important for us to package that information in a way that helps students make those connections. And you had referenced sharing information and storytelling. And we're standing up and telling stories. So my question is, do you have any techniques or approaches when it comes to storytelling? Because I've seen some teachers that are like, oh, wow, this is really like a theater, really like a show. I'm just engaged. They're bringing in puppets and things like that. And then, of course, the other extreme is, a PowerPoint karaoke type deal where some students are sitting there thinking, wait, should I be listening or should I be reading type deals? So tell us a little bit about some of your strategies when it comes to standing up on that stage.
Sure. Well, I like to use the physical space as much as I do, approaching storytelling from a verbal standpoint. So having the slides behind me is a great way to bring in a lot of information students should be seeing. My room is an old technology room, so there's a lot of space. It had also been converted into a gymnasium at one point, very small one. So I have a much larger open space than most classrooms do, and everything in here is movable, from the tables to the chairs. So I can reconfigure this space any way that I want to, which helps sort of use the element of surprise or awareness, gets the students hooked into what's going to happen today. Like the room is suddenly different. And we can try doing different things in different areas of the room. It doesn't always need to be a fixed space facing forward. And I find that tends to get the students involved. Sometimes I can use a certain spot in the room to accentuate what we're doing that day. And a lot of that feeds into the idea that I tell them that, what we're doing when we're doing theater in the classroom is we're really learning how to communicate. And communicate isn't just from our own tools, the actor's tools, voice and body, but also the space that's around us and how that might impact the way that we might relate to somebody, or what we need to do to make sure that the information or the story or whatever we're trying to express carries from us to them.
And Jim, I'm such an advocate, and I know you are as well, of theater training, and that every person in the world should get theater training or take a theater class or an acting class at some point, because it is about communicating ideas in an effective way. So what do you do with your high school students to help them shift the focus from instruction to experience?
They have to get on their feet. It sounds very simple, but it seems to be the biggest barrier to anything that they're going to do in the acting class. And we do have that shift from middle school. It's very general theater, in that idea of communicating is probably as far as we really get with acting. I do throw a couple of random things out there. Actually, Cyndi, I don't know if you remember Tim Ward's opening workshop where we used to walk around the room making animal noises at each other. Did you have that experience?
Yes.
You remember that? I do that every day, first or second class with every grade level to get them breaking down. So from there, maybe a couple improv things in the middle school, but high school, it's a pure acting class. So they can't hide. They need to get up. They need to move around. And I find that that's one of the biggest hurdles to getting involved. And once they're on their feet, there's really no hiding from doing the work. They have to get into it. It's there's only so long you can stand there motionless, speechless before you're required to do something, which I think is important too, not just as actor training, to learn that there's a reason why your character speaks and moves and thinks or does whatever they do. But that's what we do in life. And that's what you're going to need to do when you're communicating to someone. And again, going back to all those other ideas I mentioned in the middle school classroom about the space and the environment and the time and yada, yada, yada.
I can't help but revisit the improvisation piece a little bit more and just kind of tease that out, because, all right, my first initial response was to kind of like invite you and Cyndi to start making animal noises as part of the improvisation. However, I do recall, when people talk about, get me to share the acting stories, there was an audition. It was actually my most preferred school. I never got into it, the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. And I got to the last round. And in the last round, there was about maybe 20 of us. They were looking to bring in 10. And I'd been doing really good. And then they suddenly asked us to be champagne bottles, like the liquid inside the champagne bottles. And I was like, okay. And I was stuck. I was like, I found this really challenging, right? And then they were like, okay, someone's shaking you. Someone's shaking you up now. Someone's shaking you up now. And I think realistically, probably they were just getting us to kind of loosen up and relax and open up a little bit. But it just strikes me that those types of activities probably do have an interesting place in the classroom. I don't know if maybe some grades over other grades, but could you elaborate a little bit more on that, Jim, and some of the kind of improv type activities you've had the students do? And more importantly, what your objective is when you kind of have them doing those activities?
Sure. Well, it definitely is to loosen them up. I mean, that's why it's a great thing to make barnyard animal noises on the first day. I always tell them, I don't know if this is what Tim used to say to us too, but you feel a little self-conscious walking into this room and are a little afraid of what's going to happen next. And maybe you don't like public speaking or whatever your thing is that leads you to an acting class or a theater class at this age. And just know now that we've probably done the silliest thing possible, and everything else should feel a little bit easier. And a lot of times I think students take that with them to the next class, the next exercise. Obviously some feel more comfortable than others right off the bat. But, after that, every performance exercise, it tries to just get students a little bit more comfortable. With middle school, the next thing I do with them is just give a 1-slide presentation about themselves. It's very low risk. They've done that in another class in far more detail. I do emphasize to them that they need to have more pictures than words on the screen so that they can start to tell us the story rather than just read it from the screen or point to it and say, that's my cat, that's my favorite food, or, whatever they might do. so that there's also an element of improvisation there as well. And I always bring that idea back to them that you should come in every situation that you can with a plan and be prepared in some way. But you also have to be aware of the fact that in the moment, something's going to happen that could throw that plan completely out the window. And now you're in a situation where you need to talk to someone or present a story or do whatever. And now you've got to make it up off the top of your head. And one thing that really helps students make that connection, I think, is if they've had any kind of experience playing a sport, they know that they practice in order to have those skills ready for whatever situation happens in a game. A lot of times, too, the improvisations I'll try to draw from real life experiences. Like you're trying to ask your parents for something, or you need to get an extension on a homework assignment. So this way, it's familiar examples that maybe they can draw some of their life experience into, or it's just slightly removed where we can start to talk about substituting those experiences into what they've done, and they can see how they're able to think on their feet and come up with a creative idea. Or I always emphasize too that I don't know is one of two incorrect answers that they can give me in the room. The other one is the correct spelling of theater, which I know is controversial, but that's what students remember from middle school to high school typically. But because I tell them the I don't know is you either telling yourself you are unwilling or unable, or feel that you're unable to give the answer. And this isn't really the type of situation where you have to know the answer. You very easily make one up. And by sort of training them to do that, or giving them the experience and thereby the comfort to answer off the top of their head, whether it's correct or not, or right or not, or whatever they're used to having to give the right answer in another classroom, starts to break that cycle a bit, and and build up a little bit of a inhibition.
So Jim, middle school and high school, tough age, right? Tough age to get them really to break outside their own little paradigms because they're so self-conscious and worry about what others might think. And just this past week, I was working with a group of 5th and 6th graders on invention. As they walked into the classroom, I handed each of them a pipe cleaner. And I said to them, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to create the most unusual item with this pipe cleaner. And almost all of them, except for one, got really into it, started working on it. And I looked at the one and he said, I'm not doing this. So I had a choice. Do I force him to do it? Which is, no, I said you have to do it. Or do I let him go? Now I let him go, and he ended up wanting to judge who was the best one. So I said, I need a judge to judge the best one. And he said, I want to do it. I want to judge it. I'm like, okay. So he wasn't at all interested in being a part of it. But then he realized how much fun they were having, and then he wanted to be part of it. So I'm sure that you face this a lot. So can you give us some examples of when this has happened and what you did about it?
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about the way things tend to get set up, especially in both middle school and high school, is that they're both built-in actors and audience. So some students just need a little more time in the audience before they're willing to step into the role as actor. If I can give them that grace, I certainly will try to do that. There are some times, and I actually just had this a couple weeks ago with a new marking period, new group of students. It was with the slideshow presentation. And I'm very adamant about, everyone needs to go. You need to be able to get up and present. It's just even brass tacks. It's my first assessment of, your skills in presentation. So I need to be able to see that. Sometimes a way around that is to provide the opportunity to record it at home. And then I can take a look at it, away from the audience, and then just try to keep an eye out for that student and find ways for them to maybe get up on stage in a group. And not always with lines. I have another student actually in another class right now who really, to her credit, I was really impressed with this. A 7th grader came up to me after the first class and said, I'm really shy and really self-conscious when it comes to speaking in front of a group, but I want to improve. So I'm going to be here and I'm going to do it. It just might take me a little while. And I wanted you to know that. I was floored. That was incredible. And so we've checked in every couple classes. And this week, our project is a full group story theater piece. It's we're recreating a myth, the Prometheus myth. and with a 2-page script that we have that I borrowed from my wife. And it's a great piece because there are maybe 8 speaking roles, and then the rest of the class can participate in something that's more ensemble based. So there's a point where all the Titans are fighting and everything on Earth dies. So we decided in this one class that we would have the 6 characters that played the gods come out and fight, and all the other actors would be living beings on Earth who die at the wrath of the gods. So it gave them a chance to come on stage without a line and to do something silly. We brought the barnyard animals back in with that part. That's what died. It always comes back to the barnyard animals. But this one student was a part of that, and she had a great time and felt less self-conscious about it because she was able to do that with other kids and could kind of hide upstage a little bit in the back. But she was still on stage, still doing the work, getting the experience in, building her confidence, but on her terms. And those are good examples, and it's not always that simple. Sometimes we have had to go and talk with a parent or a counselor and find out that maybe the student isn't quite ready for to be out there quite yet, and maybe they can come back around again in 8th grade. Or I've had a couple of students who have not been able to, or have not felt that they've been able to be a part of the middle school theater class, who then came to find me as a junior or senior to get their art credit in, but they wanted to redeem themselves. I had one student actually talk to me about that. He really wanted to come back and really say that he was able to do this.
I just want to follow up on the theatre a little bit, because Cyndi and I have had some back and forth in our Marco Polo. We talk about the podcast. We talk about pretty much everything, Cyndi and I, offline. And one of the things that we got into, I want to say about a month ago, was community theatre, because both of we've got 2 children that are engaged in community theatre. And I had this really tough situation where I'd kind of missed the deadline for signing up. And there was my son was in danger of not getting into the show. And one of the things that struck out to me in this situation was how much he valued the community. And we talk a lot about environmental factors in creativity, but I think there's something, of course, he loves being on stage and, developing empathy through the actor and et cetera, but just being in this environment where we've got whatever it is, and that's my question to you, what is it? But something within this environment he seems to really like. And I think part of it is the relationships that he develops, but I think there's something within that environment that allows him to interact with people in a way that's very different to how he interacts in a classroom environment, or even, in social environments outside of school. So what is it in that theater, that community piece that I'm seeing?
Wow, that's a great question. I could talk about that personally, but before I do that, I'll mention that one thing I see with students in particular is that because it's not a traditional classroom setting, and they're not, we do a couple things. We do a couple theater history pieces where they have notes and they take a quiz, and we do that. But the majority of the class, a good 75%, if not more of it, is just being creative and being theatrical and getting to relate to one another, getting to relate to a teacher and a space in a school in a way that they don't do so the rest of the day. And I think that draws a lot of students in who don't succeed or don't feel comfortable in a traditional classroom setting. It also pushes students who are very tuned into academics to tap into a side of them that maybe they don't know exists in some cases, and to do so in a very comfortable environment too. I loved yesterday. I had a student in my high school acting class who is not a theater kid. She's in the class just because she wants to have fun, and a good friend of hers is one of our actors who does all the shows. And she said before class started, "I just feel this is a very comfortable space," which I mean, you're made right there. That was great. And it's what drew me to the theater. When I was 10 years old, I developed alopecia, which is a complete loss of hair. And so I've been bald since I was 10, which is difficult, as a 10-year-old, and especially at that time when there was very little known about it. It's an autoimmune disease, and so there's no treatment. There's really no cure. I took a big hit to my self-confidence, to put it very mildly. Fortunately, I have 2 uncles who I'm closer in age to than my mother is. So they're kind of like older brothers to me. and they ran a summer stock company near where I grew up, right, their hometown, which is only like 45 minutes away. So I got invited to spend a week with them to work on a production. It was a production of Oklahoma. I got to run the light board for it, which was incredible. Actually, one of the stories I tell at the beginning of my middle school class when I introduced myself is I was an 11-year-old running a light board, which was all analog. I totally messed up a light cue on opening night at the start of Act 2, and it was in the paper. So my first theater review was how badly I had messed up the lights at 11, which I loved. And that's what I noticed, too. I spent a lot of time just hanging out on the balcony of this old vaudeville house, watching the technicians build the set. I helped people run cables. I was on headset, as a part of the crew, and I would watch rehearsals and just see the community that was built and just all the different types of people. These actors and artists came from all over the country. They all looked different, spoke different. They had different lifestyles than I could even imagine. And just being someone who felt like an other at that point and seeing others coming together and just not caring, in my 10-year-old eyes, 11-year-old eyes, was really quite moving. And there was nowhere else I wanted to be. And so, and I see that in students. We get a lot of students in this theater program. I've always had them when I was running an education program with the theater. There were a lot of kids who would show up there who would say that they feel like it's the one place that they can be themselves, or parents will tell me my child was so quiet and we were worried about them. They found people in theater and now they've started to blossom. They have confidence in themselves. They're finally speaking out. I can't get them to stop talking to me anymore. It's things like that. So it's been very nice. And I just think it's that need to collaborate to make the art happen that provides theater with the community that can be so beneficial to so many people.
What a beautiful story. And actually, Jim, I didn't know that story about you. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, no, I was just going to say, the thing about college too was that because I always feel weird talking about it because it sounds so stupid. And I look back on it and I feel kind of silly about it. But I wore a wig all through middle school and high school just so I could kind of look like other people. And what was nice too for me about college was not only going into a theater program where I knew I was going to have that kind of community, but it was a new place where nobody knew me. So I could just be myself. So you've always known me looking like this, right? And I never talked about it because it's not a story I want to share. So that's the reason why. That's the reason why you didn't know.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. And I think theater is a place where you can sort of find, at least it was for me as well, like a place where you can be yourself, even though you're being someone else, right? So it's sort of like this finding yourself through other perspectives of the characters that you get to portray.
Do you want to bring more creative and critical thinking into your school? Look no further than our podcast sponsor, Curiosity to Create.
Curiosity to Create is a nonprofit organization dedicated to engaging professional development for school districts and empowering educators through online courses and personal coaching.
And if you're craving a community of creative educators who love new ideas, don't miss out on their Creative Thinking Network. Get access to monthly webinars, creative lesson plans, and a supportive community, all focused on fostering creativity in the classroom.
To learn more, check out curiositytocreate.org or check out the links in the show notes for this episode.
So Jim, I want to kind of bring this a little bit back to creativity because I think there's so many things that you shared, from just being yourself to collaborating with others in a community. I think this idea of community and creativity is something really important for us to kind of explore and maybe just finish up the show with. Because I have to say, I remember when I was sitting with auditions with other actors, and there's like those holes in the ceiling sometimes, quite often in doctors' offices. And I remember we were looking up and waiting for the results of the audition, and someone made a comment about the holes in the ceilings and the amount of divergent thinking that started happening with all these strangers that didn't know each other. We all started cracking these wild jokes about how these holes happened. And every single time I'm in the dentist chair or at a doctor's appointment, I look up and I see those holes in the ceiling. I remember that time with these complete strangers having a divergent thinking exercise, in essence, about these holes and just laughing. And I know that I couldn't be the same person with my soccer friends, and I couldn't be the same person in the classroom environment and at school and even with my social friends as well when going out. And I was always fascinated about how it wasn't that I changed, but how I kind of interacted differently within this particular community. And just that example there, that imagination, that creativity, that divergent thinking, I'm seeing a connection. So what's your take on that, connecting theatre back to creativity in schools?
The other spaces don't really require, well, I don't want to actually, I shouldn't say that, because I'm sure we engage in divergent thinking in a lot of different environments, but just a simple question, what if, which is built into a lot of, acting theory. It requires you to think differently, to take another aspect of looking at something, or the fact that production goes on stage in one time and place, and another time and place it's going to be totally different because it's different people, different group, different environment, different time, looking at the same piece with their own knowledge, background, experiences, everything else. And I think that, to go to the question too of why I've noticed children struggling with that so much more recently, is that I don't think there's really a set space that prompts those kind of questions. You talked about being in a doctor's office, there were holes in the ceiling, and you kind of had that conversation with the people around you. But I don't know that there's really a space within the school environment, or even within an extracurricular activity outside of something like theater or another art form, where you do need to have a perspective that's divergent, where you can exercise that. One of the things I noticed after graduate school, I went and taught high school English for a year. And then I left to go work at the theater. And then I came back to teaching, as I said, like 7 years ago. And I did teach English and theater when I first came back to the classroom. But one of the reasons I then made the move here to just teach theater was because the way I viewed English, it really had lost a lot of its fun. There was very little room for creative writing. In fact, there was no creative writing in the curriculum that I received. I had to introduce some of that myself, and it's sort of bell ringers, and so 10 minutes a day we could write and think creatively. And then after that, we're reading epic stories and drama and poetry, and we're analyzing it every second that we have that we're not reading it. And I've seen students come in, and I give them a prompt to look at a picture and tell me what they see in the picture, and to make up a story about it. And I've had students tell me that they can't do the assignment because they don't know where that location is or who those people are. And so I'll sit with them and tell them, no, you're creating it, you're making it up. And they'll eventually get around to doing that, because they're children, and there is some kind of innate creativity and play still within them. But it's really fascinating to me how much some students struggle with what really on its face seems to be a very simple exercise in creativity. Tell me what you see in that picture and make up a story about it.
I think there's some really great stuff there, but unfortunately we do have to wrap up the show because we're about at time, and we want to make sure we've got time to ask the same question we ask all of our guests. Given your background, I think you've probably got some great tips for our educators when it comes to promoting creativity in the classroom. So what would be your 3 top tips?
Well, I think that idea of, find a way to look at something that is a given, look at it differently. We all have things that we take for granted, or that are done out of routine, or because we've always done it that way. Look at it differently. Find a new way to approach it, to think about it. Even I love also just flipping the classroom. Get the students up and say, here's something we normally do. You tell me how to do it. Approaching it that way. I think not being afraid to be silly. We had a great video one time in the middle of a faculty meeting where I wish I could think of what it was. I know it's on YouTube, and I think it's a TED Talk about a teacher was told by a student, you're not afraid to sing. And that's what the student remembered about his class, was that every now and then he would sing an answer or break out into song. And so something like that helped that student to remember the content from the classroom. So put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to be silly. Look at something a little bit differently. If you can approach a classroom with those 3 things, that would be a great step toward something more fun and creative and exciting for everyone involved.
Wonderful, Jim. Well, thank you so much. It was great to see you again after all of these years. We really appreciate you coming onto the show and for sharing your expertise, and keep up the great work with those students. So this concludes this episode of the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast. If you have a fellow actor or theater teacher who you think might be interested in this episode, please share it with them. And if you give us a review on your favorite podcast platform and you screenshot it and send it to us at questions@fuelingcreativitypodcast.com, then we will send you a very special gift. My name is Dr. Cyndi Burnett.
And my name is Dr. Matthew Worwood.
This episode was produced by Matthew Worwood and Cyndi Burnett. Our podcast sponsor is Curiosity to Create, and our editor is Sam Atkinson.